Well, the American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country.
I want the American people to know that from the very first day, President Donald Trump has put the health of America first.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yes. Okay. Well, that's how we're going to start off today's show. Welcome, everybody, to the Thursday edition of Stir Crazy, episode 95, Lord of the Lies. And that was Vice President Mike Pence with a fly on his head during the debate, also spewing nothing but untruths, lies, misrepresentation, misinformation. Meanwhile, Vice President hopeful Kamala Harris was basically letting the left down after issue after issue after issue. We're going to talk about the vice presidential debate last night, the one and only sorts of debates that is going to occur before Election Day. Unclear whether or not President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden will actually meet again on the debate stage. Trump says that he's not doing a virtual debate. I'm pretty convinced he's trying to kill Joe Biden. That is apparent. We're going to talk about all of that. Plus, we're going to get into how, in the midst of this pandemic, the fact that the White House itself is now a super spreader little epicenter in Washington, D.C., driving up the COVID positive rate for the District of Columbia. Donald Trump is more concerned about pushing through his Supreme Court justice nominee more so than making sure that people who are losing their homes, getting evicted, losing their jobs, and dealing with the pandemic all at the same time get some sort of relief from the government. Because, we got that $1,200 months ago. Is it still in your checking account? Is it still holding on? Is it still paying some bills? Probably not. It probably went away very quickly. So we have a lot to get into today, guys. And by the way, this is the series finale of Stir Crazy. 95 episodes in. We first took to doing this show back in late March, early April, and it was really just done as something that we thought was going to be pretty temporary, just to see if we could do our thing, quarantined and under lockdown orders. So we kind of proved that we can do that. And so Stir Crazy is going to move into a different iteration on Tuesday, October 13th. I'd like to welcome everybody to Burn It Down with Kim Brown. It's going to be done on Tuesdays and Fridays, 5 p.m. right here. You can find us, but actually we're starting a new YouTube channel for that, but I'll get into that a little later. I want to get into the show, dang it, because we got a lot to get into. And we have a fantastic panel joining us today. I'm so very excited. Of course, we could not have a Stir Crazy Thursday show without Mr. Thursday. Our visuals and research producer, Andrew Corkery, is joining us. Also joining us for the first time in a long time. I know everyone in the chat is going crazy as soon as they saw her gorgeous, beautiful face. Fan favorite, the people I've been calling for in the stands for a long time, Jacqueline Luqman, co-host of the radio show by Any Means Necessary. Y'all give it up for Jacqueline. Woo! And people, while we clapping, while we getting our applause on, keep them hands putting together for our brand new editor-in-chief here at The Real News, Maximillian Alvarez. I am so excited to see this collection of Real News faces and voices. Max, welcome to The Real News and welcome to Stir Crazy, but the last one. But we're glad to have you.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, congratulations on a great show. First time caller, long time listener.
We appreciate it. We appreciate it. And let's go ahead and jump right into this vice presidential debate. Because it was obviously a little bit more polite, a lot more polite. You could actually listen to the responses from both Kamala Harris and Mike Pence. The responses may not have been much to listen to, but at least they were able to get their points across, although Mike Pence repeatedly stepped over Kamala Harris's time and stepped over the moderator, Susan Page's time as well. But I wanted to get into a couple of the so-called highlights from last night's debate, starting with the COVID response by the Trump administration, of which, of course, Biden and Harris have been extremely critical of, justifiably so. Donald Trump has botched this, in addition to now contracting COVID himself like a genius and spreading it to White House staff and even to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and even to the White House regular staff, like regular people that work out the White House, not Stephen Miller and Kayleigh McNamee, security people, people that do the housekeeping, the cooks, like regular folks. So that is a big issue. But let's take a listen to Kamala Harris's critique of the Trump administration's handling of the pandemic.
And here are the facts. 210,000 dead people in our country in just the last several months. Over 7 million people who have contracted this disease. 1 in 5 businesses closed. We're looking at frontline workers who have been treated like sacrificial workers. We are looking at over 30 million people who in the last several months had to file for unemployment. And here's the thing. On January 28th, the vice president and the president were informed about the nature of this pandemic. They were informed that it's lethal in consequence, that it is airborne, that it will affect young people, and that it would be contracted because it is airborne. And they knew what was happening, and they didn't tell you.
Before there were more than 5 cases in the United States, all people who had returned from China, President Donald Trump did what no other American president had ever done. And that was he suspended all travel from China, the second largest economy in the world. Now, Senator Joe Biden opposed that decision. He said it was xenophobic and hysterical. But I can tell you, having led the White House Coronavirus Task Force, that decision alone by President Trump bought us invaluable time to stand up the greatest national mobilization since World War II. And I believe it saved hundreds of thousands of American lives. Because with that time, we were able to reinvent testing. More than 115 million tests have been done to date. We were able to see to the delivery of billions of supplies so our doctors and nurses had the resource and support they needed. And we began, really, before the month of February was out, to develop a vaccine and to develop medicines and therapeutics that have been saving lives all along the way. And under President Trump's leadership, Operation Warp Speed, we believe, will have literally tens of millions of doses of a vaccine before the end of this year.
You know, I knew that Mike Pence was heading the White House Coronavirus Task Force, but I think I had forgotten. And then I was reminded that Mike Pence heads the Coronavirus Task Force. And under his administration, when he was governor of Indiana, Indiana experienced outbreaks of HIV and hepatitis because Governor Mike Pence wanted to make draconian cuts to state healthcare and places like Planned Parenthood that do such testing. Jacqueline Luqman, let me start with you, dear. We haven't heard your voice on here in a while, so I'm very excited to have you here on our last show of all days. But your take on that particular point of handling the COVID pandemic, because Kamala Harris came with a bunch of facts. The Trump administration fucked this up very badly, but it doesn't seem to phase Mike Pence or Donald Trump how badly they've handled this. What was your take about that exchange on that issue?
I mean, you have to understand people like Mike Pence and Donald Trump, they're speaking to their base. They are speaking to people who already support them. They're not trying to win over any converts, because even people who were allegedly undecided voters, once they saw the response of the administration to the spread of this pandemic, and absolutely once the Woodward tapes were released, and I got plenty of smoke for that weasel right there, Bob Woodward, but he's another discussion. But once people heard the evidence that not only did Donald Trump know how dangerous this virus was in February, but he lied to the American public about it, claiming that he didn't want to cause a panic, I think that eliminated a whole lot of undecided voters right there. So, Pence is, he's a true believer. He is the Christo-fascist figurehead. He is everything that is wrong and horrible and terrifying with right-wing evangelical Christianity that people hate. I mean, he is that thing. And he absolutely believes what he says. He believes what he did in Indiana. He caused an outbreak of HIV because he did not want to fund a needle exchange program for intravenous drug users because he didn't want to encourage drug use, which is, just the thinking of these people, these evangelical, right-wing evangelical Christians, thinking that inanimate objects will influence you to want to do things. I mean, my husband's a diabetic. He's got syringes in this house. I have never wanted to shoot heroin up because I see some syringes. And I know people who have addiction issues. I have never wanted to try some heroin because a friend of mine is, relapsing. So it's just this kind of ridiculous, ignorant, delusional thinking. I'm trying not to cuss so much, Kim, but I don't think it's going to work today.
We are in cuss-worthy times.
Mike Pence is the intentional threat that to Donald Trump's bumbling accidental fuck ups. There we go. I just got it out of the way. So, Mike Pence is what the GOP wanted, but he doesn't have the personality to carry a presidential campaign. So they settled for Trump. He's not convincing anybody who doesn't already support the GOP and Trump and Pence about anything that he said. It doesn't mean he doesn't believe every word of it, though, because that monster does. He believes every word.
Max, piggybacking on Jackie's point when she says that at this point, Mike Pence or Kamala Harris, for that matter, isn't about to convince any other new converts, right? People are pretty much decided where they are, and the vice presidential debate likely was not going to change that. But given the fact that the Trump administration has done such a poor job with the pandemic, it troubles me that that's not more of an issue for his base. But clearly, most of the people who have died from this pandemic are not Trump supporters, at least from a demographical perspective.
Right. I mean, I think, well, even if they are, right, I mean, that in itself isn't enough to kind of really convince them that this is Trump's fault, right? I mean, you saw that in Pence's answer, right? They have been air conditioning this kind of messaging for months since, the pandemic started, to blame the whole thing on China, to turn it into kind of this really terrifying, xenophobic, kind of new Cold War, new biological Cold War kind of with China. And I think it's really, really scary. It's even scarier that, like the Democrats' kind of strategy for parrying that is to join in on it, right? Is not to kind of resist it, but to kind of, take a different, more measured line to blaming China or, whatever it is they actually want to do. But, I think that to kind of piggyback, like you said, off of Jacqueline's point, which I thought was really, really spot on, this won't convince, anyone, of anything. Like, in fact, this debate, like most debates, not all, but most, right, is what the kind of historian Daniel J. Borstein called half a century ago a pseudo event, right? It's a pseudo event because it is an event that is specifically staged for the media, right? It is, the whole purpose of it is to provide us content to talk about for the next week or so, right? I mean, it's not really adding anything to the picture. And I guess that's the real message that people should really kind of take to heart is like, what the stakes are, what happened here, who's responsible, how many people have died, how terribly the Trump administration responded to this crisis, right? What is Pence going to actually tell you that can obscure your vision of those basic facts? And I thought that one of the things that Kamala Harris did really well was after Mike Pence kind of gave his whole, spiel, basically kind of eliding responsibility for that terrible response to the pandemic, and then trying to kind of boost all the efforts that he and the task force kind of contributed to dealing with the pandemic. Kamala Harris brought it right back to saying, well, you clearly didn't do a good enough job, right? The facts are 200,000+ people are dead, right? That's more than most wars, that we fought in, more Americans dying in most wars that we fought in. I think just constantly coming back to that point and not letting us get too sucked into kind of the pseudo event that was created by, this debate or the previous one is a good tactic. But I mean, ultimately, yeah, I don't see who, or was going to be really convinced by either side.
And I think that because Americans en masse are so deconditioned or desensitized to violence and mass death, when you keep dropping this enormous number, 210,000 people have died from this in 7-8 months, it still very much falls on a lot of people who are not receiving that message. Andrew Corkery, that has seemed to be something that the Trump administration has been hammering. They keep saying it could have been 2 million. We're lucky it was only 200,000. I think that is smart framing for their constituents, right? Because they'll take that talking point and sprint with it. But for regular people who have common sense and understand that 200,000 deaths in less than a year is nothing to sneeze at and absolutely a huge deal. We can't seem to convert the others who don't seem to think that losing that many Americans in that short of a time is something to be concerned about, or even something that would cause them to vote against Donald Trump at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole problem with Trump's really months-long attempt to gaslight this entire issue of the coronavirus into actually making people believe that they're crazy for thinking that we should have moderate, any sort of thing to combat this crisis, like putting in any sort of regulation whatsoever. So I think that's the problem is that he's not moving anyone outside of his base with this rhetoric. And Trump appears to be unable to understand that he has to win some people outside of his base in order to win this election, similarly to what he did in 2016, in that people gave him a chance to kind of show what he could do and, quote unquote, shake up the system and things like that people who were voting for Trump the first time that didn't necessarily agree with his antics or things of that nature, but kind of gave him the benefit of the doubt. Well, at this point, the jury has come back and, we have 200,000 people that have died in this pandemic. And to really attempt to give the illusion that the reality is that more could have died, that still doesn't change the fact that there's 200,000 plus people dead, and we're still going through surges of this pandemic. So Trump's campaign and electoral attempts to gaslight this are part and parcel of the main problem of his campaign, and that the few limited amount of swing voters that are left, he's unable to will them to his side because he refuses to acknowledge that he could have had any culpability whatsoever in this process. And were he able to come out and say, listen, I've made some mistakes, but here's what we're doing to come and combat this now, which is something that he's psychologically actually incapable of doing, as admitting fault. But if he were to do that, people are willing to give him another chance. He just refuses to do that and refuses to listen to the polls. Just for example, in the past few days, Bloomberg's put out some new reporting about how if Hillary, if Biden was ahead the same amount that Hillary was ahead in all these polls, he would still be far and away beating him in the Electoral College. So, I mean, obviously, we have to take that with a grain of salt. We know what happened in 2016, but clearly the numbers are different and the sentiment is different and the calculus of the White House is different because we have the knowledge of what the Trump administration has been like for the past 4 years, or at least most people do.
Guys, we've got a lot of comments from the comments. People are commenting like crazy. Bon Arkham says, Pence and Harris both are making lots of money during the pandemic. The tokenism about how sad they are about deaths is nauseating. Also got a comment here from Tyler Zacher. Pence looks like a ventriloquist dummy. He does. Astute observation there, Tyler. We agree. Who else we got here? Soon Nyman says Trump has done more to defeat the GOP than the Democrats, going so as to kill them. It does appear as though Trump is trying to kill not only his own White House staff, but his wife. Who else is Trump trying to kill with this COVID? I mean, just being
his supporters when he does these rallies that are totally maskless and, they don't buy into it at all. So,
well, you know what? I think we have to be we have to be clear about something else that's going on with the way Trump supporters respond to this virus. Look, most of the victims of the virus, a significant percentage of the people who've died from this virus have been Black, Latinx, Native American, working class, poor folks. You've got most people in this country who are living in the Midwest, in states in the middle of the country that are sparsely populated in the first place, didn't see a huge spike in COVID cases during the worst of the early months. And they don't have large populations of Black people, not even in most of the capital cities in these Midwest states where there's a lot of Trump support. So you've literally got people in this country who don't live around people who are not like them, who look at COVID-19 and who's always seen it as a problem with the cities. And then when the news reporters, then when the media started reporting on the demographics of the people who were affected most by the virus, then it became a Black folks virus, right? And we would be foolish to believe that people like Stephen Miller in the White House, COVID finally did something right, that Stephen Miller, who is now positive with the virus himself, wasn't whispering in Trump's ear. I don't think he had to whisper a whole lot, but wasn't whispering in Trump's ear, don't say too much about, how dangerous the virus is, because it's just the Blacks and the immigrants and the Mexicans who are dying from it. I think we would be foolish to think that racism, or at least some serious racial blindness in the fact that a lot of Trump supporters literally just don't live around people who are not like them, feeds a lot of their lack of belief in the seriousness of this virus. I think that's a big issue.
Well, I think that's what's woken up the whole rest of the country too. The fact that, we have all of these people in cities that are geographically separated from one another. And there's whole segments of the population that are unable to get the reality that people of color and poor folks around this country are living every single day. And their answer to that is to separate themselves further politically, further economically, and further ideologically from the needs and the issues relating to those groups of people.
And I want to kind of add one perhaps kind of asterisk to, our earlier points about most people just probably not being convinced by this. I think that there were certain objectives that Pence needed to kind of achieve in this debate that he actually did, right? Probably the most obvious of which is after Trump's dumpster fire of a debate, a week and a half ago, Pence needed to provide a calmer face, right? And he did that, right? That's pretty much what he was for. Well, that's what he's for. That's why he's on the ticket in 2016, right? He is the kind of side-eyed assurance to, any Republican voter who still has some sort of shred of shame and wants to kind of believe that for all of Trump's blustering, for all of Trump's kind of bad and embarrassing qualities, there still are, as the Democrats like to say, adults in the room, right? There are still people behind the scenes who are ensuring that the machine is moving smoothly. And that's what Pence is really there to do. And I think that, he does it effectively. And that is very worrying because, on top of providing that calm demeanor, almost like kind of terrifyingly calm demeanor, he's so well practiced in his facial cues and intonations, right? He was there to remind those people who may, have some sort of sense of shame or embarrassment, or who may just kind of be reaching that boiling point where they are no longer willing to kind of support Trump, however many of those people there actually are. He was there to remind them what is at stake for kind of the larger right cause in this election, right? And that is, the Supreme Court, right? That is kind of the fight against, abortion, right? That is the fight to kind of continue to empower corporations, right? To dismantle this country, strip it for parts, hurt working people even more, and make sure that they have fewer and fewer means to actually fight back. And I think that, that isn't something to kind of be sneezed at. I think in that regard, Pence actually was quite successful in his performance.
There's a reason he's that successful too, is because he's based in and trained in right-wing talk radio. I mean, this is where he got his start. I mean, and he's so adaptable to using the right-wing language, but saying it in such a calm demeanor, like you're talking about, Max, where he's able to convince people who were previously seemed like unconvinced about Trump and all of his antics, and the fact that his administration is essentially like a daily shit show. I mean, it's insane. So, I mean, I think that we have to take that into account. And there's other people like Pence who are on talk radio right now, who are getting the listeners, who are getting the followers in this right-wing movement. And those are the people of the next generation that Pence is kind of winking and nodding to and saying, you can do what I'm doing. We can continue this to go forward.
Well, speaking of Mike Pence's former life as a talk show host, he made reference to Kamala Harris's former life as a top prosecutor and went after the senator's record, well, especially during the context of being asked about what's happening with the case with Breonna Taylor in Louisville. Let's take a look at that exchange.
The family of Breonna Taylor has our sympathies. But I trust our justice system. A grand jury that refused the evidence. And it really is remarkable that as a former prosecutor, you would assume that an impaneled grand jury looking at all the evidence got it wrong. But you're entitled to your opinion, Senator. I think, look, and with regard to George Floyd, there's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd. And justice will be served. But there's also no excuse for the rioting and looting that followed.
Yeah. Now, Democrats and Republicans are so guilty of this. I mean, Joe Biden has done this as well. I mean, the condemnation of the so-called looting and violence, making these false comparisons to the value of property versus the value of Black life. Pence does it very casually. Trump, Biden, they all do. Jackie, let me circle back to you here. Now, clearly, we know that Mike Pence is going to say something goofy like he has full faith and confidence in the criminal justice system. And I'm like, bro, if you thought that you might get 10% of a Black vote, you might have just lost all of it right there with that one line. Now, Kamala Harris, we know, does not necessarily have, from our perspective, right, the best record as a prosecutor, but it almost went to who is the bigger law and order ticket. And I feel as though both parties, both campaigns want to stake their name to being the law and order ticket. But Kamala Harris, in my opinion, last night sort of held back from doing just that.
Yeah, I mean, because really she has to be very careful about what she says in regard to law and order and her time as a prosecutor, because she locked up a whole lot of Black folks and a lot of sex workers and a lot of other marginalized people. So, she doesn't want that dirty laundry aired out on the debate stage. And like Andrew and Max has said before, look, Pence is very good at debates. He's very good at talking. That's how he got into office. So he wouldn't have hesitated to hit back against her on that. The interesting thing about what Pence said, though, I thought it was really funny. And this is what Republicans do. Democrats do a different thing. Republicans do what Pence did. They'll tell half the truth, right? They'll say, oh, well, they'll start with some kind of ridiculous sympathy statement. And then they'll say something like, well, the grand jury saw all the evidence and decided against charging the officer. We know that the grand jury did not see all of the evidence. We know this because that was the information that one of the grand jurors used to present his case to get a motion to release the recordings of the grand jury proceedings. Kamala Harris should have responded to that lie with that truth. But you see, you're never going to get a former prosecutor to ever speak ill of a current prosecutor, even if that former prosecutor is a Black woman who is talking about a Black man who is responsible for not having charges filed against a white cop who killed an innocent Black woman in her home. So Kamala Harris, in not responding forcefully against the blatant lie that Mike Pence said in that clip, in that segment, that exposed to me just as much of who she is. And she is still indeed the top cop. She still has that in her mind. She is definitely a good running mate for Joe Biden, who, when he was giving speeches for the crime bill in '94 on the Senate floor, said that once we pass this bill, no one will ever say of the Democrats that we're not tough on crime. They're a match made in top cop heaven, Biden and Harris. And she's not. Neither one of them are going to push back on the lies of the GOP on any case involving police abuse. And they're not going to divorce this idea that you brought up, Kim, of violence being equated to property damage. I did a segment on that, and it's just like, we've really got to stop making excuses for this sleight of hand that people do when they get all up in arms and they get their panties in a bunch because the window gets broken, but there are broken and bleeding bodies in the street that nobody's doing anything about. I'm over being concerned about, a police station being burned down. I understand Kamala Harris is never going to be there where I am, but she could have been a lot more forceful in her response than she was, but she's a prosecutor, so I didn't expect anything different from her either.
Less so in the debate last night, Max, but in general, this has been a punching point, so to speak, for the Trump administration against the Biden-Harris ticket. I'm sure all of you have seen these commercials, these attack ads from, I think it's Moms for Safe Neighborhoods. I keep meaning to Google that. I'm like, what the fuck dark money is behind this bullshit where they keep showing this commercial, right? And Joe Biden's going to defund the police, and then they're going to disarm you. And then protesters are coming to your neighborhood to knock over your trash cans. And it's like, all right, y'all, simmer down. We get it. Y'all are afraid of any talk of defunding the police at all. But unfortunately, Max, like, this is an issue where the Trump administration and the potential Biden administration stand on the exact same side of this issue. Whereas, Biden and Kamala Harris are calling for, the passage of is it Restoration and Justice, the George Floyd Act, I think, that passed the House in recent weeks, but of course has been stalled in the Senate. But when you have two candidates who are exactly on the same side of quote unquote law and order, where does that leave the people who are demanding a change by the hundreds of thousands over the course of several months in the streets? Where does that leave them going to the polls in a few days, so to speak?
Right. I mean, I try to kind of, suppress this impulse because it's just a recipe for self-torture. But during this vice presidential debate and the last debate, I think, a lot of us just couldn't help it in, thinking that, okay, Biden and Harris did okay. Right. They didn't I don't think that they were, either of them was like an actual disaster. They did an okay job at kind of pairing the Fox News kind of cooked talking points that both Trump and Pence threw at them. But what I just kept thinking was, I was like, this is what progressives warned the Democratic establishment about during the primaries, right? This is what we, and so many others kind of warned Democratic politicians about back in 2016. where, anyone can see, like what Trump and Pence and kind of this illiberal right that they represent is about. You can see a mile away what the talking points are that they're going to throw at them. And that like putting someone like Kamala Harris in there is going to be a weakness, because she's not going to be able, she's going to maybe be able to defend and kind of deviate a bit, to absorb that blow, but she's not going to be able to respond with a really strong right hook like she should be able to. Like anyone who's facing off against Pence or Trump in that situation should be able to. But when you have a Biden and Harris ticket, that's pretty much off the table. You can't kind of indict the very system that you have helped construct. And I think that the reference to the commercials is really, really important, because I watch a lot of football on Sundays, and this commercial from Trump is on every channel all the time. It's the one with the former NFL player that talks about Biden's role, like in constructing kind of the carceral state with the crime bill in the 90s. And, then it talks about Trump's kind of allegiance to liberating Black people who have been imprisoned. But there's such as with most things with Trump, there's such a kind of brilliant but terrifying sleight of hand that occurs while you're watching this, where, they are indicting Joe Biden and the Democrats for creating an unjust system that incarcerates Black and brown people at exorbitant rates. And yet, when the kind of response that they're offering to that is this kind of feudal lord type of politics that revolves around Trump granting kind of clemency to like this or that person who has written a heartfelt letter. Like it's all run through Trump and his selective benevolence, but it's all meant to kind of present this sort of image that Donald Trump personally cares about Black people who have been incarcerated. It says absolutely nothing about how he's actually going to kind of adjust that system that he is trying to indict Joe Biden for.
Andrew, before I get your take on this, I wanted to run a quick clip from last night, and then I want us to kind of get off of the debate, because I'm getting sad, and I think there's other things that we need to talk about. But when we talk about both campaigns sort of standing on the same side of a shitty issue, the issue of standing with police or making sure police are aptly resourced and funded is not the only issue that Biden Trump agree with. Apparently, everyone's into fracking. They just want to frack every goddamn thing. Let's run that clip from Kamala Harris, Dwayne.
Joe Biden will not raise taxes on anyone who makes less than $400,000 a year. He has been very clear about that. Joe Biden will not end fracking. He has been very clear about that.
Get him.
What?
Got his ass.
Dang. So there, Mike Pence, take that. Joe Biden's not going to stop fracking. Now what?
Be for fracking too, and polluted water and all sorts of water that sets on fire. Whatever you want. We're all for that shit.
I mean, Andrew, how can these people stand there with pride and declare how much they support fracking and how much this is a good thing, not a negative thing for the environment? I mean, I just sat there last night, absolutely. I mean, I can't say dumbfounded, because I've seen these people obfuscate the truth in so many different ways on so many different issues. But it's like, for God's sakes, this is 2020, like for real, like stop playing in our faces today.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think from watching that, it wasn't surprising that they are doing that, considering their neoliberal market-based agenda that does value to some certain extent oil and gas infrastructure that we know for a fact, based on the science, is something that has to be outmoded immediately if we are to survive on this planet. It's clear as day that this is an existential threat. So what was surprising, though, was just how brazen she was in saying that, in equating it and talking about it in the same literal breath as saying that she's not going to raise taxes on people, making $400,000 a year or less. So, I mean, that just shows you like where that's at in their agenda. And for Biden and his whole campaign to be out campaigning on, climate change is an existential threat, and we're going to put green jobs together, and all of these different ads they have running out there. It's such BS when you see Kamala Harris come out there and say, oh yeah, no, fracking, totally cool, totally cool. It's double speak to the highest degree. And it's just is anathema to trying to deal with the crux of what the issue is, which is that climate change and fossil fuel emission, particularly as it relates to coal, gas, and also methane, is persona non grata in a world where we need to actually make sure that we're dealing with the climate crisis. So I just couldn't believe that she had said that. And I think it gets to the larger issue that the Democratic Party has still not figured out how to absolve itself from these oil and gas and fossil fuel lobbyists while still going out there and greenwashing all the time. I mean, our colleague Steve Horn does a lot of really great reporting about this. And it's clear that the United States is heavily invested in fossil fuel infrastructure. And it's something that Biden is inherently looking at to continue.
Well,
Andrew, quickly. I'm sorry, Max, one second. Andrew, just tell the people what greenwashing is for people who may not be familiar with that term.
Yeah, so greenwashing is basically when a politician or a corporation comes in and tries to say that they're doing something good for the environment, presents some sort of seemingly reasonable case for doing so, and then in actuality, their policies underlying that are fundamentally ingrained into the fossil fuel infrastructure that the world has been a part of for the better part of the last 70 to 80 years. So I mean that's basically what greenwashing is at its most basic form. There's different ways you can look at it too from a corporate perspective, whether it's a company like Chevron that myself and Steve Horn just covered, and their entrance into the Eastern Mediterranean and how destructive that is, both in terms of climate policy and its effects on biodiversity, but also in terms of ratcheting up war between, Turkey, the US, Greece, Cyprus, Israel, all these countries that are looking to increase militarization and increase the climate crisis. So, I mean, there's a number of different examples, but that's basically what it is.
Okay, I just wanted anyone who wasn't familiar with the term greenwashing, just wanted to make sure we know everybody knows what it is. I'm sorry, Max, you were making a point. Go ahead.
No, thank you for asking that clarifying question. Because everyone should go check out that piece by Andrew and Steve. I thought it was really, really great and really important stuff. But I was just kind of hopping in just because Andrew triggered me. But I was saying just a minute ago, right, that in these debates, the kind of chickens from the primary are coming home to roost and basically tying Biden's and Harris's hands when they should be able to launch more forceful attacks against this, very attackable administration. The question of kind of criminal justice, is another perfect example of how this dynamic has played out, but on the long term, right? Even during the primaries this year, we were always hearing that if Bernie Sanders is elected, right, the right is going to, lose its shit. It's going to be red baiting from now until November. All they're going to be doing is calling out socialist and scaremongering, and that's going to hurt, Sanders in the election. Lo and behold, you get the very anti-socialist, non-socialist, the very proudly non-socialist Joe Biden kind of leading the ticket with Kamala Harris. And the right is still calling him a socialist, right? They're still kind of trying to attack him, and claim that he and his administration will be the most far left thing that we've ever seen, which, by the way, they've said about literally every Democratic presidential candidate I can remember in my lifetime, right? We do not have the luxury of being surprised by this tactic because they do it all the time. And the sad thing is they do it all the time because it works. It has worked. And for some reason, the Democrats have not seen this as an actual weakness. But, every time they are accused by the right of being too far left, right, of being socialist, right, their response is to move farther to the right to say, no, we're not. Look, we love law and order, right? We're gonna help engineer this horrifying kind of racist carceral police and surveillance state, right? That shows you how law and order we are. And if you're on the right, it's a win-win for you, right? Either they lose and you get to kind of impose your far right kind of agenda, or you lose, but you have essentially goaded your opposition into kind of moving closer to the policies that you wanted in the first place. Meanwhile, as you said, Kim, like the rest of us who want to actually have these like systemic injustices addressed are left looking around like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I just want to respond to that real quick, Kim, if that's okay.
Quick, yes.
Oh yeah. Sorry. No, all I was going to say is that I think what Max is getting to is right, but also too, there's a bit left out, I think, in some of the analysis on the left, in that my generation, for example, people that are like in their, early to late, 20s and early 30s, we don't have the same kind of psychological trigger that a lot of people have when they hear the word communism, when they hear the word socialism, because we've lived under the most destructive capitalist empire our entire lives. I mean, we've been through multiple financial recessions that have been caused by sheer greed and capitalistic fodder. We've lived through multiple wars that were engineered for resources in order to keep afloat this dying capitalist machine. So, I mean, it's not a tactic that's going to really continue to work with a lot of people that are younger, who actually look more often at capitalism as a greater risk and a greater evil for very legitimate reasons than socialism.
Inshallah.
Before we move off this topic, Jackie Luqman, I wanted to pose the last question to you, because what we saw at play last night had a lot to do with power dynamics, and sort of echoing off a point that Max made about the Biden-Harris ticket sort of inability to go for the jugular when it comes to the policies and tone and presentation of the Trump administration. And what we saw last night was a Black woman, a woman of color, versus a cis hetero white male, moderated by a white woman. And we saw the white male speak continuously over the Black woman, who would smile and politely say, I'm speaking, I'm speaking, I'm speaking. We had the white woman moderator address Mike Pence formally as vice president, and then would occasionally address Senator Harris as Kamala. I know we are not fans of Kamala Harris, but I know we have been in a similar situation, in parentheses, S, situations, numerous times, where a white male is talking over you. And if you tell that motherfucker to shut his mouth, you the problem. Not the person who's talking over you, who's being rude to you, who is disrespecting you and your thoughts and ideas. But to react in a negative way would reflect badly upon you. Talk to me about Kamala Harris's performance from that perspective, in your opinion.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing, because I can't stand Kamala Harris. Her politics are the fucking devil, and they have caused so much harm to our people. People like her in that position have harmed our people. I mean, that's just, but this is the point at which we have to look at the system, the role of the prosecutor, and not the person who's in the prosecutor position. We have to look at the system that causes these problems, and not the people who are pulling the levers or who are the representatives of the system, because we're always going to come up with these kind of problems where we're going to have to be, it's like we're going to have to defend somebody who is Black, but who is also upholding the system. And man, that feels fucked up, but that's just the way it is. So yeah, the issue of Mike Pence being, the cis hetero white supremacist, crystal fascist white dude that he is, not respecting a woman who is also a Black woman. He's just doing what he do. And honestly, the moderator, who also, I think, took time from Kamala Harris and gave it to Mike Pence. I think I read that somewhere. Honestly, as a white woman who has proximity to power, she's just doing what she do. Because a lot of times in these situations, we can't depend on our so-called sisters in the feminist movement to have our backs against white men who have power. We saw that in that debate last night. fucked up as it is, that's how it go. This is why you have to interrogate the system. And you can't spend a whole lot of time being mad at who people like Daniel Cameron are married to. Like, I saw memes about him in particular about, oh, he's married to a white woman, and that's the problem. His white woman wife is not his problem. His problem is that he's a fucking capitalist pig who loves the cops. That's the problem. And he benefits off of this system of capitalism, white supremacy, and the oppression of poor and working class people. That's the issue. The issue is the system. So, yeah, I mean, it was really messed up that Kamala Harris has to, she had that Black woman moment, and she's going to keep having them. And that's just how this system operates. But I think the mistake that people are making on, I won't say they're on the left, but the mistake I'm seeing some Black people and people of color make is to equate all criticism of Kamala Harris and her policies to anti-Black racism, or we just don't want to see a Black woman succeed. I don't want to see anybody in the position of prosecutor be able to continue to do what prosecutors do. I don't care if that person is my auntie, and I love my auntie, but if she ever became a prosecutor, we wouldn't be friends no more. I'm just telling you, it's the system that's the problem. I hate that we have like these stratifications within the system where we almost feel like we have to pick and choose what we have to advocate for, but we don't, because the problem is the system. It's not the person. It's not the identity. It's not the personality. It is the system that that person or that identity either benefits from, upholds, or makes excuses for. The sexism was shit. It was garbage. But Cop Mala's still a cop, so I don't know.
Listen, ladies and gentlemen, Jacqueline Luqman. I have nothing more to add. She just slammed the mic down right there. So, all right. I didn't realize we had spent this much time on the debate, and that is my fault. So, but I would be remiss if we did not address sort of what the big news story of today was, and it was coming out of Michigan. The FBI has arrested at least a half a dozen alleged domestic terrorists for plotting to overthrow the government and kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Dwayne, I know we have a clip from the FBI press conference and the Michigan Attorney General's press conference from earlier this afternoon, but I know it's long. It's like 3 minutes. So let me know if you can advance it like halfway to like 1:30. And maybe we can get half of it in, because I don't want to suck up too much time. But I felt as if the information that was presented at the press conference was extremely compelling, especially given the fact that, the head of the Department of Justice, Bill Barr, has repeatedly called out Antifa, Black Lives Matter, as groups worthy of additional surveillance and people who are trying to destabilize the country, when in fact it is these white supremacists who are armed to the teeth, who don't give a shit about shooting law enforcement way more than anybody Black in the streets would probably want to. And they are the ones that are the biggest threat really to this so-called democracy. Dwayne, can we get a snippet of that presser, please, sir?
That a group of individuals was discussing the violent overthrow of certain government and law enforcement components. Through confidential sources, undercover agents, and clandestine recordings, law enforcement learned particular individuals were planning to kidnap the governor and acting in furtherance of that plan. The alleged conspirators used operational security measures, including communicating by encrypted messaging platforms, and used code words and phrases in an attempt to avoid detection by law enforcement. Among other activities, members of this conspiracy on 2 occasions conducted coordinated surveillance on the governor's vacation home. Fox and Croft, in particular, according to the complaint, discussed detonating explosive devices to divert police from the area of the home, And Fox even inspected the underside of a Michigan highway bridge for places to seat an explosive. The complaint further alleges that Fox purchased a taser for use in the kidnapping and that the group successfully detonated an improvised explosive device wrapped with shrapnel to test its anti-personnel capabilities. The FBI and state police executed arrests of several of the conspirators when they were meeting on the east side of the state to pool funds for explosives and exchange tactical gear.
Max Alvarez, let me start with you here because, first of all, Gretchen Whitmer has apparently responded to today's events. I did not get a chance to see her press conference before we went to air, but from what I can gather on social media, she let Trump have it, basically laying a lot of this at the feet of the president, who has openly enabled white supremacists, not even since and before this first presidential debate. What is your reaction to this arrest? And, you know, if we're going to be in the carceral system, I'm glad the FBI is at least keeping an eye on violent white folks. Thank you. We do appreciate it because it's necessary. What is your take on today's events coming out of Michigan?
I mean, it's both shocking and not, right? I mean, you know, like I was living in Michigan for the past 7 years, right? I was there at Michigan State when we kind of stood in front of Richard Spencer's Nazi-like buddies who were marching like towards us, and the police were all around us, right? Like, this is not a new problem, right? There are a lot of far-right, you know, kind of cells in that state and all over the country. And, you know, the thing is, you know, to respond to your point about the FBI, I guess this is, again, why I'm not surprised, because the FBI has actually said that it's like, look, white supremacists, like homegrown terrorists, are by far the greatest threat in, you know, the country today, the biggest terrorist threat. They have, you know, they've been infiltrating police districts, right? They have been plotting these sorts of things since, you know, the Oklahoma City bombing, right? I think one of the kind of weird and bad things is that we actually, on a day-to-day basis, don't really get, as citizens, the full scope of the organizations of these sorts of like white supremacist and fascistic organizations, because there are a lot of them. There are a lot of plots that are foiled. They just don't always make the news, right? And so that allows, I think, a lot of people to kind of continue to perpetuate this bullshit, both sides kind of line where extremism, understood as, you know, just a kind of position, like a positionality away from the center of kind of respectable politics, that extremism in itself becomes the overarching problem. And we lose all sense of scale. We lose all sense of like how extremism on the right is infinitely bigger and infinitely more threatening than any kind of extremism on the left, which, you know, like even equating those two things is, you know, ridiculous. But this is in part the consequence of that kind of constant ideological air conditioning that we get, where we actually kind of deviate from the real problem that's staring us in the face.
Andrew, you know, I said this on Twitter and it got no likes or retweets, but I don't care. I'm going to say it, right? The problem is white people are not afraid of other white people nearly enough for my satisfaction. And, you know, just echoing everything that Max just laid out about what we know about the rise, and I can't even say the rise of white supremacy, because guess what? White supremacy been here. I mean, you can't rise if it's the foundation, right? And, you know, the white supremacists can't really infiltrate the police if they're the ones who founded the police, the law enforcement apparatus in the first place. So it's always been baked in there. But absent of that, these you know, militia-based groups, I think this group was calling itself the Wolverine Watchmen, okay? And yet Donald Trump it calls on these people, right? These are his supporters. This is his base. And yet these are the ones that are the most dangerous. When you talk about trying to blow up Gretchen Whitmer's vacation home and kidnap the governor, I mean, I'm sure people come up with cockamamie criminal, adventurers all the time, but this is way, way out there. And it's almost a good thing for the governor for her safety, and I guess for that of her family, that this group was unearthed.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just goes to show, the legacy of racism in this country that Donald Trump is attempting to utilize for his own political purposes. And that's the problem with sort of the neoliberal establishment's viewpoint on it, is that they view this as something that existed and exists more because of Trump, and it doesn't exist outside of Trump. So it certainly does exist without Trump. He's just mobilizing it for his electoral politic reality and utilizing it in a way to stir up fear in his other constituencies of his base so that he can maintain electoral power in whatever sense of the word he wants to do it in. So I think that's part of the problem. Another part is that, Trump actively in this situation in Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer is right. He tweeted during the lockdown, "Liberate Michigan." What exactly does liberate mean? What is the context behind that when you have someone saying that, the people in Charlottesville, there's the alt left and there's the alt right? This insane moral equivalence that he gives to bolster his own electoral benefit at the expense of the safety of the American people. And also just the fact that the media doesn't call him out on it more regularly is amazing. And it leads to situations like this where people, describe these guys as militiamen. They're domestic terrorists. They're like Timothy McVeigh, except they didn't pull it off. That's literally what it is. It's insane that they think that these people are militias, and that militia language kind of gives them the ability to get away with more things because there's an internal psychology in America that we are fundamentally a country based on a violent revolutionary takeover of an empire, of the British Empire. So people don't see that in such a negative context, especially people on the right wing. So if you refuse to call them domestic terrorists, white supremacists, things like that, and consistently label them as militias, that has a totally different connotation in the psychology of the American understanding of how we view these groups. So I think that the more the media can do that, the better off we'll be in at least getting the people who are sort of on the fence about this issue to understand the gravity of it so we can do something about it.
Jacqueline Luqman, when I heard this news, I several things went through my head, but all I could hear was Malcolm X's voice in the back of my head talking about the chickens coming home to roost. And as Andrew illuminated right there, the media's reluctance to call these people terrorists and these types of acts terrorism, and yet these are the scariest mofos out there. What is your take about what happened, or at least what the FBI announced today?
I'm actually not surprised. I'm surprised it took this long for something like this for a plot like this to materialize, because like Max said earlier, these people are organized. People, and he's right, people don't understand just how organized these racist, white supremacist, fascist groups really are. These are not, a bunch of silly kids sitting in their mom's basement on a 4chan chat room. These are grown men and women and their children who are stockpiling weapons. And I've said before, I don't have a problem with people owning guns for protection, but these people are stockpiling weapons to start a civil war that they want to make us a part of that. And the idea that these kinds of violent acts have not been done before by these people, where, okay, it wasn't they were plotting to kidnap a governor, but in Greensboro, they shot down Black and communist working class union organizers in the street with the help of the Greensboro police in broad daylight. That happened in the late 70s. So that's just right off the top of my head. One of the things I can remember that white supremacist groups have done. That's not something that somebody just wakes up and decides, you know what, I'm going to go shoot me some Negroes today. That's not how that works. That is the result of organization. It's coordination between individuals and other like-minded people forming a group, coordinating with law enforcement, planning. This is what they do behind the scenes. While I remember right before Charlottesville happened, we were arguing online with people on the so-called left who were laughing at the alt-right marching through the campus of the University of Virginia with tiki torches and laughing at them because they had tiki torches and, oh, you don't have to take them seriously. They're just a bunch of clowns with tiki torches. And all the Black people who see these kinds of things online telling these young white so-called leftists or at least progressives, you can never underestimate these people. They're no joke. You might laugh at their tiki torches, but trust me, when they go home and organize their actions against us, they're not joking. And they've proven us right, unfortunately, again. So I think the bigger lesson for me from this is not that, oh my God, how could this have happened? The bigger lesson for me is, oh my God, how the fuck did you not see it coming? How many times are we going to have to tell people in this country that this is what these people do? And they will keep doing it unless they are stopped. That is the lesson. This is not going to stop. So there.
And that's
By the way, I
Trump's
upgraded my
normalization of
Antifa
it.
membership to the platinum plan, so I have a platinum can of soup. There you go.
Don't say that too loud, Jacqueline Luqman. The feds have been knocking on people's doors for jokes, honey. People have been joking online about being Antifa members, and then they say the Secret Service show up at their house. So I don't want to know.
I can't repeat what my daddy said the other day. I'm going to keep that to myself. But
Yes,
he was like,
yes,
I wish it would. But
you live too close to the Secret Service. They'd be at your house in 2 seconds. Like, Jacqueline Luqman, step outside, please. And we don't want to have any impact. Guys, that is our show. I want to thank our fantastic panel today for joining us. Jacqueline Luqman, Maximillian Alvarez, and Andrew Corkery. Y'all, this is the last episode of Stir Crazy. Like I said, we started this show during the lockdown. Yes, Dwayne, we have come to the end of the road. Yes, we have, and it's so hard to say goodbye. But listen, you don't have to miss any of this type of political talk and dialogue and conversation and interviews and topics and all the things that the people who have been watching Stir Crazy for these last several months have come to expect. And I can't tell y'all, all of my regulars, you know who you are. I can't even name all of you. Steely Steve, Schulte 100, Black Magic, Red, like everyone that bees in the comments, every show. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. And I hope that you will continue to watch and support as we launch our new program next Tuesday, October 13th. It's called Burn It Down with Kim Brown. It's going to be similar, but a little different. And you're just going to have to tune in to know what those differences are. So listen, if you're already subscribed to therealnews.com, our newsletter, our email blast, you're going to get all the information about our new program, our new offering here. But I just want to thank everybody for watching and thanking everyone who has worked on Stir Crazy. It is absolutely a group effort. Y'all hear me always call out for Dwayne. Dwayne Gladden has been holding us down behind the scenes from day one. Thank you very much to Charles and Tunde, who I believe helped conceive Stir Crazy to begin with. Of course, Taylor Hebden. Taylor, you are the backbone of this. Thank you so much to James Daly, who is our social media dude, who is our bouncer for the YouTube comments. James, appreciate all of your help. Molly Shaw, who has filled in for us on occasion. We appreciate that. Who else am I forgetting? Adam Coley, Andrew, Mr. Thursday, Jacqueline Luqman, fan favorite. We love it when you come through. And thank you to Lisa, to everyone on the Real News staff who has taken the time to appear on here. Jess Lenore, Mark Steiner, Aman Azar, Steve Horn. But yes, y'all, this is it for Stir Crazy. 95 episodes. We did it. It's done. Join us next week, next Tuesday for Burn It Down with Kim Brown. All the information available at therealnews.com. Listen, Y'all have a good one, a good evening, a good weekend. I will see y'all next week. Like I said, celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day on Monday. And go back on YouTube and watch videos of Christopher Columbus statues being pulled down. That is what I'm going to do on Monday. Probably what we're going to do on the show for episode 1 on Tuesday. So thank you all again. And yes, we have come to the end of the road. And I hope everybody has enjoyed Stir Crazy. Thank y'all very much. See ya later. Bye. Woo. End of the road till I can't take it.